I introduced my soon-to-be husband to my family over dinner, and that's when my sister smirked and said, "What did you even see in my sister? She's so ugly, you'd look better with me." My parents laughed it off. "She's just joking, don't take it to heart." A week later, I announced our wedding plans, but behind my back my parents went to my in-laws, pushing them to choose my sister instead while she spread lies. She slept around with every man. On the day of the wedding, as I tried to enter the bridal room, my mother-in-law blocked me. "Step aside, the bride's already in." I forced my way into the hall only to see my sister standing beside my husband, who looked at me with pure disgust as she shouted, "Let's all toast to the woman who always tried to steal attention." Everyone laughed as my parents grabbed me and dragged me outside like I was nothing. I stayed silent, but what I did next left every single one of them pale. I'm Amelia, and this is the story of how my entire world came crashing down in the span of one dinner conversation, only for me to build something even stronger from the ashes. Growing up, I always knew I was the other daughter. While my sister Elise was the golden child with her perfectly straight blonde hair and natural charisma, I was the bookworm with mousy brown hair who preferred libraries to parties. My parents, Edward and Margaret Thompson, never bothered hiding their favoritism. Every achievement I earned was overshadowed by whatever Elise did that week, whether it was getting asked to prom or landing a modeling gig at the local mall. But I carved out my own path. I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in forensic accounting, landed a prestigious job at a top firm in Chicago, and bought my own condo at 25. I thought I'd finally found my place in the world when I met Victor Grant at a coffee shop near my office. Victor was everything I dreamed of but never thought I deserved. Tall, dark-haired, with kind brown eyes and a smile that made my heart skip beats. He was a successful architect, thoughtful, and surprisingly, he seemed genuinely interested in me. We dated for 2 years, and when he proposed last spring with my grandmother's ring that I'd inherited, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. That's when I made the mistake of thinking my family might actually be happy for me. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Victor had insisted on meeting my parents properly before we announced our engagement publicly. I'd warned him about Elise's tendency to make everything about herself, but he just laughed and said he was sure we'd all get along fine. We arrived at my parents' house in Evanston on a crisp October evening. The dining room was set with Mom's good china, and for a moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd see how happy I was and just be glad for me. Victor charmed them immediately, complimenting Mom's pot roast and discussing sports with Dad. Elise arrived fashionably late, as always, wearing a tight red dress that showed off her figure. She worked as a social media influencer and had that polished look down to an art form. The conversation flowed smoothly until Victor mentioned our engagement plans. That's when Elise's expression shifted, her smile becoming predatory. "Wow, Amelia," she said, leaning forward with mock concern. "I had no idea you were seeing anyone seriously." She turned to Victor with a practiced tilt of her head. "I have to ask though, what did you even see in my sister? She's so ugly, you'd look better with me." The words hit like a physical blow. The room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I felt my face burn with humiliation as I waited for someone, anyone, to defend me. Instead, Dad chuckled. "Elise, you're terrible." Mom shook her head with an indulgent smile. "She's just joking, Victor. Don't take it to heart. You know how sisters are." But Elise wasn't done. "I mean, seriously, look at us side by side." She stood up and posed next to my chair. "Amelia's always been the plain one. I've had guys tell me they'd date her just to get close to me." Victor's jaw tightened, and he reached for my hand under the table. "I think Amelia is the most beautiful woman I've ever met," he said firmly. "Inside and out." Elise laughed, a tinkling sound that had always made me feel small. "How sweet. Well, if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation. When we finally left, I was shaking. Victor held me in his car for 10 minutes while I cried. "We don't have to see them again if you don't want to," he said softly. "I'm so sorry they treat you that way." But they were still my family, and I convinced myself that once we were married, things might improve. How naive I was. A week later, we officially announced our engagement. We set the date for December 15th and began planning our winter wedding. I was working with a coordinator, had found the perfect venue, and ordered a dress that made me feel like a princess for the first time in my life. That's when the phone calls started. Victor's mother, Helena Grant, began calling me with increasing frequency. First, she wanted to chat about the guest list. Then she was concerned about the budget. Finally, she started dropping hints about how young people sometimes rush into things. I didn't know that behind my back, my parents had been working overtime to sabotage me. They'd started with Victor's family, visiting them under the guise of getting to know each other better. But instead of bonding over wedding plans, they'd spent their time planting seeds of doubt about my character and pushing Elise as the better choice. Amelia's always been difficult, Mom told Helena over coffee one afternoon. She's jealous of Elise and has always tried to compete with her. We worry she's not emotionally stable enough for marriage. Dad was even more direct with Victor's father, Raphael. Look, man to man, Amelia's had a lot of boyfriends. A lot. I'm not saying she's a bad person, but Elise is the one with a good head on her shoulders. She's the kind of woman who'd make a good wife. Meanwhile, Elise was conducting her own campaign. She'd started showing up at Victor's architectural firm, bringing him lunch and staying to chat. She joined the gym where he worked out and coincidentally ran into him several times a week. She commented on every social media post he made, always with flirty emojis and inside jokes. But the real poison was the lies she spread through mutual friends and acquaintances. Poor Victor, she'd sigh to anyone who would listen. He has no idea what Amelia's really like. She slept around with every man in college, there were rumors about her and 3 different professors. I've tried to tell him, but he won't listen. Family loyalty, you know. She crafted elaborate stories about my supposed promiscuity, my drinking problem that didn't exist, and my emotional instability. She showed people carefully edited screenshots of old text messages taken out of context, making them look like evidence of affairs or breakdowns. The most devastating lie was the one about my job. Elise told everyone that I'd been sleeping with my boss to get promotions, and that I was on the verge of being fired for embezzlement. She even created fake documents to back up her claims, using her influencer skills to make them look authentic. I noticed Victor becoming more distant as December approached, but when I asked about it, he assured me everything was fine. What I didn't know was that he was receiving anonymous letters and emails with evidence of my alleged affairs. Photos of me having business lunches with male colleagues were presented as romantic dates. My late nights at the office were characterized as sneaking around with other men. The pressure from both families intensified. Helena Grant began calling Victor daily, expressing her concerns about marrying someone with Amelia's reputation. My own parents went so far as to suggest postponing the wedding until Amelia gets help for her problems. I was too busy with final wedding preparations to realize the extent of the conspiracy against me. I was focused on last-minute dress fittings, confirming vendor details, and trying to manage the stress of planning a wedding while working full-time. The night before the wedding, I had a moment of pure happiness. I looked at myself in the mirror wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace and felt beautiful for the first time in my life. Tomorrow, I'd marry the man I loved, and we'd start our life together. I should have known it was too good to be true. On the morning of December 15th, I arrived at the church at 9 a.m. to begin getting ready. The bridal suite was supposed to be reserved for me and my bridesmaids, but when I approached the door, Helena Grant stepped out and physically blocked my path. "Step aside," she said coldly. "The bride's already in." My stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, what?" "Elise is getting ready. The family decided it was better this way." I pushed past her, my heart pounding. The sight that greeted me will be burned into my memory forever. Elise stood in front of the mirror wearing my wedding dress. It had been altered to fit her perfectly, and she looked stunning. My bridesmaids, women I'd considered friends, were helping her with final touches, acting as if this was completely normal. "What is going on?" I whispered. Elise turned to me with fake sympathy. "Oh, Amelia. Didn't anyone tell you?" Victor realized he was making a mistake. We've been seeing each other for months, and yesterday he asked me to marry him instead. "That's impossible," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, doubt crept in. The distance, the strange conversations, the way he'd been acting. "He said he felt trapped by family expectations," Elise continued, applying lipstick with practiced precision. "But when he realized what he really wanted, he came to me. We're soulmates, Amelia. You understand, right?" I stumbled out of the bridal suite in my street clothes, my mind reeling. Guests were already arriving, and I could hear the organ music beginning. I made my way toward the altar, desperate to find Victor and understand what was happening. But when I entered the main hall, I saw him standing there in his tuxedo. He looked handsome and nervous, exactly like a groom should. Except he wasn't waiting for me. When Elise appeared at the back of the aisle in my dress, carrying my bouquet, Victor's face lit up with a smile I'd never seen before. As she walked toward him, he looked at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted. That's when I understood. This hadn't been a last-minute decision or a moment of confusion. This had been planned, orchestrated, and executed with surgical precision. I tried to approach the altar, but my parents appeared on either side of me. Mom grabbed my arm tightly while Dad positioned himself to block my path. "What are you doing here?" Mom hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." "This is my wedding," I said, loud enough that several guests turned to look. That's when Elise, now standing next to Victor at the altar, decided to address me directly. "Everyone," she called out, her voice carrying across the church. "Let's all toast to the woman who always tried to steal attention." She raised an imaginary glass. "Amelia, I hope you can learn to be happy for others instead of always making everything about yourself." The congregation laughed. People I'd known for years, family friends, even some of my co-workers who'd been invited, they all laughed at me like I was the punchline to a joke I didn't understand. Victor looked at me with pure disgust, as if I was something distasteful that had interrupted his perfect day. "Get her out of here," he said quietly to my parents, but I heard him. Dad and Mom each took one of my arms and physically dragged me toward the exit as the wedding march began playing. Guests stepped aside to let us pass, some recording on their phones, others whispering behind their hands. They deposited me on the church steps like garbage and went back inside to watch my sister marry my fiancé. I sat on those cold stone steps in my regular clothes, listening to the sounds of celebration from inside. The laughter, the music, the joy that should have been mine. When the doors opened an hour later and the happy couple emerged for photos, I was still sitting there. Elise saw me first. She whispered something to Victor, and they both looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. Then she tossed her bouquet directly at my feet and laughed. "Thanks for the dress, sis. It looks better on me anyway." That night, I drove home to my empty condo and sat in my living room surrounded by wedding gifts that would never be used. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in the darkness, planning. See, everyone had forgotten something important about me. I wasn't just the plain sister who was good with books. I was a forensic accountant with a talent for uncovering hidden truths and building airtight cases from scattered evidence. And I had 3 months of vacation time saved up. The first few days after the wedding were the hardest. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from people who'd been at the church. Some were genuinely concerned, asking if I was okay and expressing shock at what had happened. Others were clearly fishing for gossip, wanting to hear my side of the story so they could share it with their friends. I ignored them all. Instead, I spent those initial days methodically going through everything that had happened in the months leading up to the wedding. I made timeline charts, printed out screenshots of text messages, and organized every interaction I could remember. My dining room table became a war room covered in papers, sticky notes, and color-coded files. The more I analyzed the sequence of events, the clearer the pattern became. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision or even a gradual drift. It had been a calculated campaign designed to destroy my relationship and steal my life. On the 4th day, I received an unexpected visitor. My doorbell rang at 7 in the evening, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw my colleague Jessica Williams standing in the hallway holding a bottle of wine and a bag of Chinese takeout. Jessica was one of the few people at my firm who'd become a genuine friend rather than just a work acquaintance. She was a few years older than me, divorced, and had a no-nonsense attitude that I'd always admired. "I know you probably don't want to see anyone," she said when I opened the door, "but you need to eat, and I need to make sure you're not planning to do anything stupid." I let her in, and for the first time since the wedding, I found myself talking to someone about what had really happened. Jessica listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. "Amelia," she said when I finished, "this is beyond family drama. This is fraud. Identity theft. Conspiracy. You realize they've committed actual crimes, right?" "I know," I said quietly. "I've been thinking about that. And more importantly," Jessica continued, "you have the skills to prove it. Most people in your situation would be stuck just knowing they'd been wronged. But you? You can actually do something about it." She was right. My training in forensic accounting meant I knew exactly how to trace financial records, identify patterns of deception, and build evidence-based cases. I'd spent my career uncovering corporate fraud and embezzlement. How different could personal betrayal be? Jessica stayed until almost midnight, helping me organize my thoughts and plan my next steps. By the time she left, I had a clear strategy. The investigation would have 3 phases: intelligence gathering, evidence collection, and strategic deployment. I'd approach it like any professional case, with one crucial difference: This time, it was personal. Phase 1 began the next morning. I started by creating fake social media accounts using variations of common names. Jessica had helped me come up with personas that would seem authentic but wouldn't be traceable back to me. Through these accounts, I began following Elise, Victor, and their friends, carefully studying their online activity for clues. What I found was immediately revealing. Elise's Instagram stories showed her at restaurants and locations I recognized as places where Victor and I had planned to go for our honeymoon. She was wearing jewelry I'd never seen before, expensive pieces that far exceeded her usual budget. Most tellingly, she was posting photos from inside Victor's apartment, clearly having moved in within days of the wedding. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered Victor's private Facebook account. Unlike his public profile, which was carefully curated for professional appearances, his private account told a different story. He'd been tagged in photos at bars and parties throughout November and early December, events he told me he couldn't attend because of work obligations. More damaging were the comments and messages I could see between him and mutual friends. References to finally being free and dodging a bullet painted a clear picture of how he really felt about our relationship. One particularly cruel exchange with his college roommate referred to me as the placeholder until something better came along. The evidence of their affair was everywhere once I knew how to look. Restaurant check-ins at places they'd gone together, fitness app data showing them working out at the same gym at the same times, even Venmo transactions between them that predated their supposed relationship by months. I documented everything meticulously, taking screenshots and organizing them chronologically. Each piece of evidence was saved in multiple locations and backed up to secure cloud storage. After 2 weeks of digital surveillance, I had enough to confront them directly, but that wasn't my goal. I wanted to understand the full scope of their deception and ensure that when I acted, it would be devastating and complete. That's when I decided to bring in professional help. Marcus Kamala came highly recommended from a contact at my firm who'd used him for a corporate investigation. When I met him at a coffee shop downtown, I was surprised by how ordinary he looked. Average height, unremarkable features, the kind of person who could blend into any crowd, exactly what you'd want in a private investigator. "I've heard about your situation from mutual friends," he said after I'd explained what I needed. "I have to ask, are you looking for evidence for a legal proceeding, or is this more of a personal satisfaction thing?" "Both," I answered honestly. "I want to know the truth, all of it. And I want to make sure that when this comes out, no one can claim I'm just a bitter ex-fiancé making things up." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good. Emotion cases can go sideways fast if you're not careful. But if we do this right, with proper documentation and legal methods, whatever we find will hold up in court." He quoted me a fee that made me wince, but I'd been saving for a wedding that would never happen. The money was sitting in my account anyway, and this felt like a much better investment. "One more thing," Marcus added. "Once we start this, there's no going back. If we find evidence of serious crimes, you'll be morally obligated to report them. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Elise laughing as she threw her bouquet at my feet, about my parents dragging me out of the church like garbage, about Victor looking at me with disgust. "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." The investigation began immediately. Marcus had resources and techniques that went far beyond my social media surveillance. Within days, he was providing me with information that painted an even darker picture than I'd imagined. The affair had started exactly 2 weeks after I'd introduced Victor to my family. Elise had reached out to him on Instagram with a direct message complimenting his architectural work. From there, she'd gradually escalated the contact, moving to text messages, then phone calls, then in-person meetings. But what made it truly sinister was how calculated it all was. Marcus had obtained records showing that Elise had researched Victor extensively before making contact. She'd looked up his projects, his interests, his favorite restaurants, everything she needed to appear like his perfect match. Even more disturbing, she'd been documenting the seduction process. Her phone contained detailed notes about Victor's responses to different approaches, what worked to make him feel guilty about being with me, and strategies for accelerating his emotional dependence on her. One entry from early November read, "D is starting to pull away from S but still feels guilty. Need to amp up the pressure about her cheating while positioning myself as the supportive friend who really understands him. Maybe stage a few more coincidental run-ins at his gym." Another, from late November, "Parents totally on board with the plan. Dad thinks D will be easy to manipulate once we get him away from S's influence. Mom is already planning the wedding, says we can use S's deposits and just change the name." Hilarious. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. This hadn't been a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. It had been a months-long campaign to destroy my life for Elise's entertainment. But Marcus's most devastating discovery was financial. Victor hadn't just been cheating on me emotionally, he'd been planning to rob me blind. Your ex-fiancé has serious money problems, Marcus explained during one of our weekly meetings. He's got over $200,000 in credit card debt, he's behind on his car payments, and he took out a second mortgage on his condo that he can't afford. He slid a folder across the table. This is why he stayed with you as long as he did, and it's probably why your sister's plan worked so well. He wasn't just looking for love, he was looking for a financial bailout. The documents showed that Victor had been researching my financial status for months. He'd somehow obtained copies of my bank statements, probably through my parents who had access to some of my accounts from when I'd been younger. He knew about my savings, my investment portfolio, my condo equity, everything. Here's the really sick part, Marcus continued. He'd already started changing your wedding vendor contracts to put himself as an authorized contact. If the wedding had gone through, he would have had legal access to your accounts through the marriage, and based on these notes, he was planning to transfer everything to hidden accounts and file for divorce within 6 months. I stared at the evidence, feeling physically ill. So Elise wasn't just stealing my fiancé. She was helping him steal my entire financial future. Exactly. And your parents were in on it. Look at this. The next set of documents showed email exchanges between my parents and Victor discussing my spending habits and how I couldn't be trusted with money. They'd been building a case for Victor to take control of my finances after the wedding, painting me as financially irresponsible despite my successful career and substantial savings. They were going to have me declared incompetent, I whispered, the full scope of the betrayal finally becoming clear. It looks that way. Between the lies about your mental health, the fabricated evidence of affairs, and the financial manipulation, they were setting up a perfect storm. Victor gets your money, Elise gets Victor, and your parents get. What exactly? I thought about that question for a long time. What had my parents gotten out of destroying me? The answer came to me slowly, and when it did, it hurt more than all the financial scheming combined. They'd gotten rid of the daughter who made them uncomfortable. The one who'd succeeded despite their neglect, who'd built the life they couldn't control or diminish. Elise was their golden child because she needed them, depended on their approval and financial support. I had become inconveniently independent. By helping destroy my marriage and financial security, they were ensuring I'd have to come crawling back to them, grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance they offered. They wanted to break me, I told Marcus. Completely. Make me so desperate that I'd be grateful for any kindness they showed me. Marcus nodded grimly. Well, they definitely committed felonies trying to do it. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? I'd been thinking about that question for weeks. The old Amelia, the one who'd spent her whole life trying to win her family's approval, might have just taken the evidence and used it to quietly start over somewhere else. But that Amelia had died on the steps of St. Matthew's Church. I want to destroy them, I said calmly. All of them. Completely and legally. Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd known him. Now you're talking my language. The next phase of the investigation focused on building criminal cases against each of them. This required going beyond their personal betrayals to document actual legal violations that prosecutors would be willing to pursue. For Elise, the tax fraud was obvious and extensive. Her influencer income was substantial, over 6 figures annually, but she'd been reporting less than half of it to the IRS. She'd been classifying personal expenses as business costs, including the expensive dates with Victor, luxury clothing that she wore once for photos then returned, and rent for her apartment that she claimed as a content creation studio. But the bigger issue was the deceptive advertising. As an influencer, Elise was legally required to disclose paid partnerships and sponsored content. Marcus's investigation revealed that she'd been accepting payment from companies to promote products without proper disclosure, violating FTC guidelines and potentially defrauding her followers. More seriously, she'd been promoting financial services and cryptocurrency investments without proper licensing, earning substantial commissions from followers who lost money based on her recommendations. Several of her followers had already filed complaints with state regulators, but the complaints had been scattered and uncoordinated. I could help change that. For Victor, the crimes were even more extensive. The financial fraud I'd suspected was just the beginning. Marcus discovered that Victor had been systematically overbilling clients for years, adding unauthorized charges to project invoices and pocketing the difference. He'd also been selling architectural plans to competing firms, essentially stealing his employer's intellectual property for personal profit. Most damaging of all, he'd been having affairs with several clients' wives, using his access to their homes during design consultations to begin inappropriate relationships. In at least 2 cases, these affairs had led to divorces where Victor had provided testimony favorable to the wives in exchange for financial compensation. "This guy's been running a one-man crime wave," Marcus said as we reviewed the evidence. "The affair with your sister is actually the least of his legal problems. For my parents, I expected to find some minor financial irregularities or tax issues. What Marcus uncovered was far more serious. Dad's construction company had been systematically defrauding its pension fund for over a decade. Small amounts at first, carefully disguised as administrative fees and investment losses, but totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. The money had funded their lifestyle upgrades, vacations, and Elisa's early influencer career expenses. Mom's crimes were equally shocking. As a school district administrator, she'd been approving invoices from fake vendors, shell companies she'd created with Elisa's help. The companies supposedly provided catering, cleaning, and maintenance services to the district, but in reality, they existed only on paper. The money was transferred directly to accounts controlled by my parents. "They've stolen nearly $500,000 from taxpayers," Marcus explained. "This isn't white-collar crime, this is public corruption. The FBI will definitely be interested." As the evidence mounted, I felt a strange sense of vindication. These weren't good people who'd made one mistake in judgment about my relationship. They were criminals who'd been operating sophisticated fraud schemes for years. My humiliation at the wedding was just one more crime in their long list of violations. The final piece of the puzzle was understanding how they'd coordinated their attack on me so effectively. The answer came from Elisa's phone records, which Marcus had legally obtained through a contact in law enforcement. Starting in September, there had been dozens of calls and text messages between Elise, my parents, and Victor. They'd been planning every detail of my destruction, from the lies they'd spread about my character to the timing of the revelation at the wedding. The most chilling discovery was a group chat they'd created called Operation Fresh Start. The messages showed them celebrating each small victory and turning Victor against me, strategizing about how to access my financial information, and even planning how to divide my belongings after they'd successfully broken up my engagement. One message from Elise read, "Amelia's wedding dress came in today. It's going to look so much better on me. Can't wait to see her face when she realizes she paid for her own replacement's wedding gown." Another, from Mom, "Victor signed the paperwork giving him access to Amelia's investment account. Once they're married, we can start the transfers. She'll never know what hit her." The casual cruelty was stunning. They'd been treating my destruction like a game, awarding points for each successful manipulation and laughing about my pain. But they'd made one crucial mistake: they'd documented everything. By December, I had enough evidence to put all of them in prison for years. Financial fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion, public corruption, professional misconduct, the list of charges was extensive. But I still wasn't ready to act. I wanted to understand one more thing: how many other people had they hurt? This required expanding the investigation beyond my immediate situation. Marcus helped me contact other women Victor had been involved with, former employees of Dad's construction company, and parents of students in Mom's school district. What we found was a pattern of destruction stretching back years. Victor had left a trail of broken relationships and financial victims. 3 other women had similar stories about discovering his cheating, though none had been as systematically betrayed as I had. His former employer had suspected him of theft but hadn't been able to prove it before he left the company. Dad's construction workers had been losing pension contributions for years while he lived in luxury. Several families had lost their retirement savings because of his theft, but they blamed market fluctuations and poor investment performance. Mom's corruption had directly impacted students' educational experiences. Money that should have gone to classroom supplies, building maintenance, and educational programs had been diverted to fund her family's lifestyle. "You're not just getting justice for yourself," Marcus pointed out during our final meeting. "You're getting justice for everyone they've hurt." That realization crystallized my resolve. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about accountability. The people who'd betrayed me were predators who'd been operating with impunity for years. They'd counted on their victims being isolated, confused, and lacking the resources to fight back effectively. But I wasn't isolated. I had professional skills, financial resources, and now overwhelming evidence of their crimes. Most importantly, I had something they'd never expected me to develop: the absolute conviction that I deserved better than what they'd given me. The planning phase was complete. Now it was time to execute. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator named Marcus Kamala. Marcus specialized in marital infidelity cases and had contacts throughout the city. Within a week, he traced the timeline of Victor and Elise's relationship back 4 months, almost to the day after I introduced Victor to my family. The evidence was damning. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, gym memberships that coincidentally started the same week. Elise had been posting subtle photos on Instagram that, when analyzed, clearly showed her with Victor at various locations. She'd been careful to crop him out, but reflections in windows and shadows told the story. More importantly, Marcus discovered that Elise had been documenting everything. She'd kept a detailed journal on her phone about Operation Sister Swap, complete with strategies for seducing Victor and breaking down his resistance. She'd even rated his responses to her advances on a scale of 1 to 10. But the real goldmine was financial. Elise had been using her influencer income to bankroll expensive dates and gifts for Victor, claiming them as business expenses on her taxes. She'd also been accepting payment from various brands to promote products she'd never actually used, which violated FTC guidelines and several of her contracts. While Marcus worked on Victor and Elise, I focused on my parents. Using skills I developed in my professional life, I began tracking their financial dealings. What I found was fascinating. Dad had been skimming money from his construction company's pension fund for years. Small amounts, carefully disguised as administrative fees, but totaling nearly $200,000. Mom, who worked as a school district administrator, had been approving fake invoices from a catering company she partially owned, essentially stealing taxpayer money to fund her lifestyle. The beautiful house in Evanston? The luxury cars? The expensive vacations they posted about on Facebook? All funded by theft and fraud. I documented everything with the same meticulous attention to detail I brought to my professional investigations. Bank records, forged invoices, unexplained deposits, witness statements from employees who'd noticed irregularities. I built a case that would make any prosecutor salivate. But I wasn't done yet. Victor's architectural firm had been my final target, and what I found there was almost too good to be true. The man my family had convinced to leave me was not the upstanding professional he appeared to be. Victor had been inflating project costs and pocketing the difference for years. He'd also been selling architectural plans to competing firms, which explained how he could afford his lifestyle and his stated salary. Most damning of all, he'd been having affairs with several clients' wives, using his access to their homes during consultations to begin relationships. The evidence was all there in his carefully hidden accounts and communications. Marcus helped me gather everything legally, ensuring it would hold up in court. By February, 3 months after my humiliation at the church, I had enough evidence to destroy all of them. But I wanted to do this right. I started with the government agencies. The IRS received a detailed report about Elise's tax fraud, complete with documentation of her false business expense claims and unreported income. The FTC got a comprehensive file on her deceptive advertising practices and failure to disclose paid partnerships. The Illinois Department of Revenue received everything I had on my parents' financial crimes. The FBI got a report on Dad's pension fund theft, which crossed state lines and therefore became a federal crime. Victor's professional licensing board received documentation of his ethical violations, while the district attorney got evidence of his fraud and theft. I also sent carefully crafted anonymous tips to several of his former clients, letting them know they might want to audit their project costs. But the most beautiful part was how I revealed the affair. I created a presentation titled The True Story and sent it to every single person who'd attended the wedding. Family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors, everyone who'd laughed at me on the church steps received a detailed timeline of the conspiracy against me. The presentation included screenshots of Elise's journal entries about seducing Victor, photos of them together taken months before the wedding, financial records showing Elise's payments for their dates, and audio recordings that Marcus had legally obtained of Elise bragging to friends about stealing Amelia's man. I sent copies to Victor's architectural clients, Elise's brand sponsors, and every member of both extended families. I posted it on social media, tagged everyone involved, and made sure it couldn't be ignored or deleted. The reaction was swift and devastating. Victor's firm fired him immediately and launched their own investigation into his financial irregularities. 2 of his major clients filed lawsuits for fraud, and his professional license was suspended pending the board's review. Elise lost every single brand sponsorship within 48 hours. Companies moved quickly to distance themselves from the scandal, and her social media accounts were flooded with comments calling her a fraud and a homewrecker. The tax investigation froze her bank accounts, leaving her unable to pay her rent on the luxury apartment she'd been flaunting. My parents tried to weather the storm, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. Dad was arrested at his office on a Tuesday morning, led away in handcuffs while his employees watched. Mom lasted until Thursday before being escorted from her school district job by security. The local newspapers picked up the story, painting it as a cautionary tale about social media fraud and family betrayal. Elise's carefully curated image crumbled as reporters dug deeper into her background and found a pattern of manipulative behavior dating back to high school. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later. I was grocery shopping when I ran into Helena Grant, Victor's mother. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, but I approached her with a warm smile. "Helena, how are you?" She shifted awkwardly. "Amelia, We had no idea about Victor and Elise's affair. If we'd known they'd been lying to us." "It's okay," I said gently. "I understand you were just trying to protect your son. Though I am curious, did Victor ever tell you why he really left me?" Her face grew pale. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot I'd prepared for just such an occasion. It was from Marcus's investigation, a text message from Victor to Elise that read, "Once I get access to Amelia's savings account after the wedding, we can pay off my debts and start fresh. She's got over $300K saved up, plus her condo equity. It'll set us up for life." Helena stared at the screen in horror. He was going to rob you?" "Financial fraud, technically. But yes, he was planning to clean out my accounts and disappear with Elise. I guess you could say I saved him from making an even bigger mistake." She looked sick. "Amelia, I'm so sorry. We believed everything they told us about you being unstable and unfaithful. I can't believe we helped them do this to you." I patted her shoulders sympathetically. They were very convincing. Elise is quite talented at manipulation, it's just a shame she used those skills for evil instead of good. The final piece of my revenge came 6 months later when the legal proceedings concluded. Victor pled guilty to multiple fraud charges and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. His architectural license was permanently revoked, and he faced millions in civil judgments from former clients. Elise was convicted of tax evasion and fraud. She received 3 years of probation, community service, and a massive fine that wiped out what remained of her savings. Her social media career was permanently over, and she was forced to move back in with relatives in Indiana. My parents both received prison sentences. Dad got 7 years for the pension fraud, while Mom received 4 years for her school district scheme. They lost their house, cars, and most of their possessions to pay restitution. The beautiful irony was that their crimes had been going on for years before I ever met Victor. I hadn't caused their downfall, I'd simply brought their existing corruption into the light. As for me? Life has never been better. The story of my revenge went viral, inspiring articles about standing up to family bullies and the power of meticulous preparation. I received job offers from 3 major firms and eventually started my own forensic accounting consultancy specializing in fraud investigation. I met my now husband, Oliver, at a professional conference 14 months later. He's a prosecutor who specializes in white-collar crime, and he finds my story both horrifying and impressive. We bonded over our shared appreciation for justice and proper documentation. Our wedding last November was small, intimate, and perfect. Just close friends and my maternal grandmother, who was the only family member who'd ever treated me with consistent kindness. She walked me down the aisle and whispered, "Your grandfather would be so proud of how strong you are." Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty about destroying my family. The answer is simple: I didn't destroy them. I revealed who they really were. They destroyed themselves with their lies, theft, and cruelty. They'd been committing crimes for years, treating people badly, and believing themselves untouchable. I just made sure their actions had consequences. Elise recently reached out through a mutual acquaintance, asking if we could put the past behind us and reconcile. She's apparently struggling to find work and thought family connections might help her rebuild her life. I politely declined. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. I learned that I'm capable of more strength than I ever imagined, and I refuse to go back to being the family punching bag. My new life is built on truth, genuine relationships, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice, while sometimes slow, is eventually served. I wake up every morning grateful for my husband, my career, and the knowledge that I stood up for myself when it mattered most. And every December 15th, the anniversary of what should have been my wedding day, Oliver and I celebrate what we call Independence Day. Because that was the day I stopped letting other people define my worth and started building a life worthy of who I really am. The meek may inherit the earth, but the well-prepared inherit justice. And sometimes, that's even better.